has failed. We are now back on, that concludes all amendments. We are now back on discussion for HJR 5. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Johnson, Representative Jacoby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Anna and Ellie, I want to apologize to you. I ran for office to make Iowa a better place for you, a community that respects women and respects your choices, especially a community that respects your rights over your bodies. I've listened to you when you told me, Dad, this isn't the Iowa that I grew up in. And sadly, there's very little mention about men, males. There's no mention about their personal responsibility. You see, one of my daughters is a heck of a self-starter, majored in communications, and will most definitely start her own business. The other daughter is a medical professional as soon as she graduates from graduate school, a medical profession that we sorely need in the state of Iowa. But according to them, they will move. They will not live in Iowa. You see, they're both fiercely independent, a way that my wife and I proudly raised our daughters. I do have two questions about HJR 5. Would Representative Holt please yield?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
You're in order, Representative Jacoby.
Thank you. Just so the Iowans who are listening in tonight and will follow the debate and the issue itself, if we pass this out next year as opposed to this year, would it take effect any earlier?
No.
Okay. Well, what is the earliest then that this amendment, if passed, would take effect?
Well, Representative Jacoby, I'm sure you know the process as well as I do. In order to amend the Constitution, it has to pass through two general assemblies, and then if that is accomplished, then it would go to the people for a vote.
And what would the timeline be?
Well, you can figure that out, Representative Jacoby, just as well as I could. I know you know the procedure.
Actually, I was asking to clarify it for people, the constituents of Iowa. Thank you, Representative. If you don't want to answer the question, then I'll do it through social media. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the lady from Lynn, Representative Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. I stand today in opposition of HJR 5. Putting the word abortion in the Constitution does not make it abortion neutral. If the goal isn't to ban abortion, then what is the goal of this bill? If this bill becomes part of the law or Constitution, like laws like the 72-hour forced waiting period and the 6-week abortion ban would become law, making abortion virtually inaccessible for most Iowans. So don't tell me that this isn't about banning abortion, because you and I both know it is. Iowans, don't be fooled. If anti-abortion Republicans succeed in their ultimate agenda, legal abortion will be completely shut off, and providers, people seeking abortion care, and those that support them will be thrown in jail. People struggling financially, blacks, indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ people, and young people are hit hardest by these devastating laws. From abortion to prenatal care to preventative care, blacks, indigenous, and people of color, do you have equal access to health care? Racism and structural inequality shut them out. COVID-19 has ripped back the curtains of these problems. And here we are again. We get to see it again. Their concerns are often ignored or not taken seriously. And that leads to worse outcomes for COVID-related health issues and higher rates of maternal and infant death. Across Iowa and the U.S., people are rising up for racial, gender, economic, and social justice. We are fighting for a future in which we can control our own bodies, safely care for our families, and be free from violence. We will continue to fight to ensure abortion remains legal, but more than that, we will continue to fight for a vision that is much more than holding on to the limited rights we have, and we won't stop until that vision is realized. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from Blackhawk, Representative Brown Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. So this is something that I've been thinking about even over the interim. I have to say that it's getting exhausting. In my 7 years here, this line of legislation has done nothing to reduce abortions in Iowa. Absolutely nothing. In fact, since 2008, when the legislature switched to the state-funded version of state planning programs, abortions have actually increased by 25%. Prior to that legislation, abortions had dropped 56%. So we've actually screwed it up, gang. The medical providers within the state blame this rise on the state's controversial decision to withdraw from the federal funding state planning program. We turned away $3 million from the feds, and we were decreasing abortions by 56%. We now are running it by the state, and we've increased by 25%. The fact that the life of the mother doesn't matter. Rape and incest doesn't matter. Couples struggling with infertility doesn't matter. And the fact that birth control may and will be limited doesn't matter is problematic. It's an insult to women and against women's personal constitutional rights over their own body. If none of these amendments are a threat to HJ 5, then why didn't we just approve them tonight? I've always been kind of intrigued on how we use constitutional rights in the House. We appear to use them when they're convenient for us, and not so much when they're not. If a mask is against your personal constitutional rights, then this amendment definitely crosses some sort of line. I also find it very humorous when I hear smaller government, yet you spend a great deal of time in the woman's uterus. So it was brought to my attention by a young leader coming up, and I want to share it with you. A woman can sleep with 100 men in a year and only carry one full-term pregnancy. A man can sleep with 100 women in a year and possibly father 100 children. So whose constitutional rights are we concerned about tonight? Is it a woman's or should it be a man's? Just a thought. Since when does the Constitution remove women's rights? Or anybody's rights? Isn't the Constitution there to protect our rights? But yet tonight we want to remove them. And Representative Holt, you and I have debated this debate many, many times. If this HRJ is not about abortion and it's about the overreach of the judicial system, then why aren't we running a bill about the overreach of the judicial system? Why are we even talking about abortion? Just a thought. Do we think about that? Maybe this bill is misnamed. So I come back to, we've been here for 7 years, and we have yet to achieve our goal. And by attacking women, we are just forcing women to drive across state lines and use unregulated clinics. If a woman wants something done, now men, you know this, she will get it done. Nobody in this body is going to stop that. So far, this current legislation through the state-funded version of family planning have treated 1,502 people. That is down from 5,857 people. The Iowa Public Health Departments are overly concerned in 1 year that the increase of STDs has grown 1,800. Since the goal is to reduce abortions, and we've yet to achieve that or even get close, and everything you have done thus far is a failure, then maybe it's time to draft legislation that will increase education in the clinics, in the schools, because we know that when we did that, our numbers were down. Remember, 56%. When we were educating our children, providing birth control, had more treatment for women and men, had more education for young men and women. We need to provide more adoption options. We need real family planning. We need more birth control. We need more providers, not less. My rural legislators, what do you have there? You don't even have OBGYs anymore. And rather than sitting in this room passing more legislation that won't help, it's time to stop and step into our communities and be a mentor, engage within, utilize the resources in our communities. We have wasted 7 years and actually lost ground. It's time to empower women and provide the services they need and are asking for. Lastly, we have put all of this time and work into an amendment that at the end of the day will not do a damn thing. It does nothing. We have wasted hours and hours and hours. And in my emails, Iowans are asking for COVID recovery. Healthcare workers are still stressed. Vaccine rollout is lacking. Businesses, small businesses want to recover. Economic growth is vital. Unemployment is a huge issue still. We have done none of this. When will we actually do something for Iowans? Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from Cerro Gordo, Representative Steckman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to continue on the same vein as Representative Tammy Brown Powers. I think she brought up some excellent points. The Constitution is supposed to protect our rights. It doesn't take them away. And make no mistake about it, that is exactly what HJR 5 does. It's taking away women's rights to make their own health decisions. And since I have been here, going on 13 years now, every single year we have to listen to this. Bill after bill, limiting women's health care, limiting what they can decide. We know better than she does. We know better than she does even if she consults her doctor, her husband, and her God. But you've heard all this before. We've gone through this over and over. We all know what this bill is really intended to do, to end all legal abortions. And that's what it says. We, the people of the state of Iowa, declare that this Constitution does not recognize, grant, or secure the right to an abortion. That's what it says. My question is, if this is your goal, to end abortions, why not go with proven outcomes? This doesn't help, as has been pointed out several times. When you cut Planned Parenthood and you cut that access to affordable health care for people that can't afford to go to a doctor, they go to Planned Parenthood, abortions went up 25%. How did that work for you? You didn't really achieve your goal. It's like doing the same thing over and over and over, and you get the same result. No one wants to see abortions increase, but the fact is, in the last 40 years since Roe versus Wade, abortions have steadily been declining. In Colorado, they offered free contraception. Abortions went down. In Delaware, between 2014 and 2017, abortions went down 37%. Did they do a constitutional amendment? Did they do a 6-week ban? No. They did affordable health care, affordable adoption, and education. Why keep doing the same thing over and over again if it's not working? Do what works, what's been proven to work. Affordable health care, affordable adoption, easy access to contraception, funding of our crisis pregnancy centers, education, education, education. This amendment does none of those things. It doesn't solve anything except take away the rights of women. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from Scott, Representative Kurth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot of arguments. We've heard the pleas for amendments that would have hopefully made this resolution, HJR 5, less bad. Not good, just less bad. And we've watched one after another of these amendments be defeated as the majority in this body voted to take away rights from women. This body has a higher purpose than that. I stand before you today to express my opposition to a bill that would strip Iowans of their right to safe, legal abortion. Let's call this bill what it truly is, an egregious attack on abortion, on freedom, and an attack on health care. This bill is being advertised as being abortion neutral. That simply is not true. This is a constitutional amendment that will no longer protect a woman's right to end a pregnancy under any circumstance, including pregnancies that result from rape or incest, or when a woman's life is at risk. As proud Iowans, we take pride in our freedom and have fought tirelessly for a life that allows us each to define our own path. For the first time in Iowa history, we are debating an amendment that would make a woman less free by crafting a constitution that takes away basic rights rather than protecting them. This amendment would take away a woman's freedom to make important health care decisions and restrict bodily autonomy. Our job as state legislators is to protect Iowans' freedom and liberty, not restrict it. Iowans deserve freedom from political interference in their personal life. Therefore, increasing reproductive complications for Iowa women. I believe that no one should be punished for their health care decisions and should be able to make decisions free from government intervention. Likewise, I believe a woman should be free to access abortion with dignity and respect. This amendment takes that very liberty away. Iowans deserve the freedom to choose. I'll be a no vote on HJR 5.
Chair recognizes lady from Story, Representative Wessel-Rochelle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Make no mistake about it. This constitutional amendment will end legal and safe abortion care in Iowa. If anyone tells you differently, you are being misled. If your wife, daughter, niece, or friend needs an abortion to save her life, it will not be available. truth, this amendment ends legal and safe abortion care in this state, no matter the circumstances. There is nothing neutral about HJR 5. HJR 5 is an extremist reaction to a reasonable and fair Iowa Supreme Court decision. The courts hold an important nonpartisan, nonpolitical role in the checks and balances of government. We must allow them to do their job. We have real problems to solve, and we need real leaders to solve them. HJR 5 is insulting. It risks a woman's health and life when we should be creating access to quality health care for all, address access to prenatal care, and address our elevated maternal death rate. 77% of Americans support Roe v. Wade. The Iowa Supreme Court decision does not expand the right to abortion, and it mirrors Roe v. Wade. The Iowa Constitution must protect us from the extremist agenda proposed in this amendment. The constitutional amendment puts both infertility treatment and birth control at risk. Thank you, Representatives Sunday and Nielsen, for trying to protect those. There are no exceptions for a survivor of rape or incest, no allowance even to save the life of the woman. Thank you, Representative Anderson and Wolf, for trying to protect that. Imagine no allowance to save the life of the woman. This is an extremist reaction to a fair and thoughtful Supreme Court decision. Under this amendment, a woman has no right to save her life if she is pregnant. No one wants to imagine these scenarios, but none of us can predict the future. Pregnancy is complicated, and every woman's experience with pregnancy is unique. Sometimes a woman may experience a health crisis of the pregnancy, and the pregnancy cannot survive. I believe women and their families should have options when they face these tragedies, and I am certain that most Iowans agree with me. HJR 5 risks a woman's life for an ideological agenda. HJR 5 takes away the options of families on when to start a family. Republicans rejected an amendment to preserve access to the pill and all hormone-based birth control? What could be more basic? What could be more a basic right? Now more than ever, we should be listening to medical professionals. We have heard repeatedly from obstetricians that tell us restriction to abortion care is dangerous and threatening. Iowans place trust in their doctors. Good leaders listen to experts. In developing public policy, we must listen to obstetricians for the health of the woman. It's appalling to see members of this body exploiting this moment of national crisis to advance an extreme ideological agenda that is out of touch with the majority of Iowans. 4,500 Iowans have lost their lives to COVID-19. We need to be coming together and doing everything in our power to provide relief to our communities, schools, small businesses, still reeling from this unprecedented pandemic. Instead, under this amendment, women will die and families will face additional challenges. In subcommittee, speakers misled us by claiming that the Reynolds decision would lead to abortion up to the point of birth. There is no such thing, and the court addressed this absurd accusation in both Roe and Reynolds. Roe v. Wade concluded the following from page 15. We therefore conclude that the right of personal privacy includes the abortion decision, but that right is not unqualified and must be considered against important state interests in regulation. Former Chief Justice Cady made a nearly identical conclusion in his Reynolds majority decision on page 55. No court has held, and we do not hold today, that a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy is unlimited. 43 states restrict abortion by gestational age. 19 states ban abortion at 20 weeks of pregnancy. 5 states ban abortion at 24 weeks of pregnancy. 18 states ban abortion based on viability of the fetus. There is no such thing as abortion up to the point of birth. Don't be fooled by this extremist language. Truth over lies. The Republican constitutional amendment is based on ideology. It is not based on fact, it is not based on medical science, and it is not based on the facts of the Iowa Supreme Court case. Once again, we have real problems to solve, and we need real leadership to solve them. Families are struggling to pay rent, feed children, and stay safe from COVID-19. And the first night of debate during the 89th General Assembly, you chose to take away a family's right to choose when to have another child. You are taking away access to birth control, and don't lie to us. Chief Justice Katie from the Iowa Supreme Court decision wrote, "Autonomy and dominion over one's body go to the very heart of what it means to be free." At stake in this case is the right to shape for oneself without unwarranted government intrusion one's own identity, destiny, and place in the world. Nothing could be more fundamental to the notion of liberty. Again, Iowans are looking for leadership. Chief Justice Katie was a great leader. We cannot be a state that would deny a woman autonomy over her body and expect young women and young families to want to live here. Representative Hall shared a story where we lost a family. This amendment is reckless, insulting, and diminishes the value of women and mothers in Iowa. HJR 5 is an extremist reaction to a reasonable and fair Iowa Supreme Court decision. We have real problems to solve, and we need real leadership to solve them. Be a leader and vote no on HJR 5.
Chair, I recognize the lady from Johnson, Representative Masher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I will be a no vote on HJR 5. When we gavelled in this session, I told my constituents back home that I would be focused on COVID. I would do everything I could to make sure Iowans had access to the vaccine and that the state of Iowa would get their fair share of the vaccine from the federal government as soon as possible. I told them I would work to reopen our small businesses safely. I would provide funding support for those businesses who were struggling to survive. And I would make sure our students could return to their classrooms safely and that their teachers and staff would all be in a safe learning environment. So what are we doing? Today, 8 more Iowans died of COVID. It's over 4,500, and some of them are people you know. They're your friends, they're your neighbors, they're your relatives. I mourn those Iowans, and I mourn with their families. We could have done more to protect them, and that's what we should be focused on. Over 1,104 Iowans tested positive today, bringing that grand total up to 315,170.
State your point.
Mr. Speaker, are we on discussion of House Joint Resolution 5 or Representative Masher's personal vendetta on COVID?
Representative Masher, please confine your comments to the HJR 5.
I look around this chamber and I know that your constituents believed you were working on the same issues that I cared about. Iowans in our districts are worried and scared. They are worried and scared about losing their homes. They're worried and scared about paying their bills. They're worried and scared about losing their businesses. They're worried and scared about dying or losing a member of their own family. And now they're worried about losing their rights. So instead of addressing their fears, we are debating a constitutional amendment that, if adopted, would take away the rights of women to make personal decisions about their own bodies. And I can tell you this: if we were taking away the rights of men to make personal decisions about their bodies, there would be a public outcry. Men would be marching in the streets saying, "Stay out of my personal life. The government has no right to control my body. Why do politicians think they have a say over what I do with my own body?" I would never dream of telling you you can or can't have a vasectomy, right? But sexism is alive and well in the state of Iowa. Legislators seem to think they have the right to control the bodies of women. If you want to reduce abortions, it's very simple. Increase funding for family planning. It was working before you cut it. So this is what I know. Iowans did not send us here to Des Moines to deny personal rights of our citizens. If this bill is placed on the ballot for the people to decide, they will vote this down, because remember our motto: our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. And that includes the right to make decisions about our own bodies and our own personal health. Vote no on HJR 5.
Chair recognizes the lady from Johnson, Representative Bohannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is the first time I'm speaking to this body. Haven't had the opportunity to meet a lot of you. I'm new to the legislature, only 3 weeks in. And I'll be honest, I had kind of hoped for a little more of a honeymoon period. I had hoped for a chance to make friends across the aisle and to build relationships before the heavy stuff kicked in. But then here comes this abortion amendment right out of the gate, and that makes it really hard. Few things have divided this country more than the abortion issue, and I really regret that. We might never agree on the philosophical questions surrounding abortion. What we do know for sure, as an objective fact, is that abortion laws dramatically affect women and girls and those who can become pregnant. What's so shocking about this amendment is the way that it totally writes them out of the equation. This amendment would completely eliminate the state constitutional right to abortion. With this amendment, once a person becomes pregnant, her life is no longer her own. There is no right to abortion even if the pregnancy threatens her life, and continuing with it could leave any existing children motherless. This amendment is not neutral to her. And if a 13-year-old girl is raped and gets pregnant, under this amendment, the Iowa Constitution would have nothing for her. Apparently, a person could survive an attack by a sexual predator only to become a victim of this legislature. The supporters of this bill tell a story. It goes like this. They say that since the beginning of Iowa's statehood, abortion was illegal here. So they say the Constitution cannot possibly be interpreted to provide a right of abortion. But about 3 years ago, their story goes, activist judges on the Iowa Supreme Court overreached and held that there was a fundamental right to abortion in the Iowa Constitution. Now, they say, a constitutional amendment is necessary to reverse that overreach. And they cleverly say that it does not ban abortion, it just doesn't guarantee a right to abortion. This narrative's wrong. First of all, the history of abortion in Iowa is not so simple. For one thing, at the time the Iowa Constitution was adopted, there was no state law against abortion. There had been some restrictions on abortion in the territorial code before Iowa became a state, but the legislature chose not to include those laws in the first state code in 1851. So when the Iowa Constitution was adopted in 1857, there was no law against abortion. Later, a state law was passed to ban abortion, but it was banned only after quickening, which is the time when a woman would feel the fetus move. Quickening happens at between 16 and 25 weeks of pregnancy. That means that abortion was legal during the first 4 to 6 months of pregnancy, or well into the second trimester. And even after abortion was made illegal, women were never prosecuted for getting an abortion, and doctors who performed abortions were only rarely convicted, usually when the woman was seriously injured or died as a result. By and large, Iowa's abortion law was used to protect women. And the Iowa Supreme Court's recognition of abortion did not just spring out of nowhere. There is a long history of constitutional protection for decisions related to procreation, or the decision of whether to have a child. That is a critical part of the privacy and individual freedom that we prize as Americans. After all, are we really going to allow the police to arrest someone for taking birth control? Yet, if this amendment passes, that could happen, because as we've heard, some groups who support this amendment believe that birth control is a form of abortion because birth control can prevent an embryo from implanting. But the most dangerous thing that's being said in support of this amendment is that it won't ban abortion. The supporters of this bill have a very lawyerly explanation. They aren't banning abortion, they say. They're just taking away the fundamental constitutional right so that the legislature can decide whether to restrict or ban abortion. But a page of history is worth a volume of logic. Bills to limit or ban abortion are introduced in the legislature every year, and one passes almost every session. The courts and the Constitution have been the only thing standing in the way. Not to mention, does anyone see the irony here? The people who are pushing to eliminate the constitutional right to abortion are the exact same people who are pushing for a constitutional right to gun ownership. So for guns, apparently, it does matter whether there's a constitutional right. Because for the sponsors of these bills, the legislature should be free to make laws to control women's bodies, but not free to make common sense gun laws. This amendment is an attempt to turn back the clock to some imaginary time when there were no abortions. But make no mistake, even when it was illegal, there were still plenty of abortions. The difference back then was that a lot of people died getting them because they couldn't go to a real doctor. They died of septic infections. They bled to death. Eliminating the constitutional right to abortion won't stop abortions, but it will dramatically affect the lives and health of people who happen to have had the bad luck to be born female. This is why the Iowa Supreme Court held that both due process and equal protection require a fundamental right to abortion. It was not judicial overreaching. It was just right. And even if you believe it was overreaching, you've already responded to that. You've changed the judicial selection process. We have new nominees on the court. It's under new leadership. Why not wait and let that play out? The proposed bill is not just any abortion law, it's a constitutional amendment. And it does not just limit specific things like late-term abortion or public funding. It takes the constitutional right to abortion away altogether. If this amendment passes, there will be no guaranteed right of abortion under any circumstance. Not for rape, not for incest, not even to save the life of the mother. Once a person becomes pregnant, their fundamental right as a human being to control their own body would cease to exist entirely. This is an extreme bill, and Iowans do not support it. The number of negative comments flooding our email is a testament to that. As a legislature, we should give people modern and practical solutions, not old and worn-out ideology. If we are serious about reducing unwanted pregnancies, we should support family planning services, which have been proven to work. As several people have already noted, the number of abortions in Iowa was steadily and significantly declining until Governor Branstad cut funding for these services, and then we have seen a 25% increase in abortions. Not a bang-up job, guys. We should also focus on COVID relief, increasing wages and improving access to childcare so that people have the resources they need to bring children into the world and to care for them. Finally, this is just bad government. Instead of coming together to work on the public health crisis, COVID relief for businesses and families, and the everyday needs of Iowans, the majority is pushing a radically partisan agenda. There is so much we need to do to help Iowans right now. We could do that together. That is why I came here. That's what I wanted to do. That's what we should be doing, not this. I urge the body to vote no on the bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Holt for closing comments on HJR 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to everyone for the discussion we've had this evening. We'll go through some of the points that were made before I go to my closing comments. Representative Anderson, it was actually the Iowa Supreme Court that amended the Iowa Constitution by judicial fiat. We are attempting to return it to neutrality on abortion by following the proper procedure to amend the Constitution, and I don't know why we would fear the people's decision in this regard. Representative Donahue, I am pro-life, and I make no apology for it. When I think about abortion, I think about two hearts and two souls. I am pro-life, and I will make no apology for it. And I would like to say that I have an expectation that this could get us to the heartbeat bill or get us to something that we fought for on the issue of abortion, but I have no such expectation. My hope is that the amendment, if passed by the people, would protect the reasonable restrictions we have on the books, such as our 20-week ban on abortion or the ban on taxpayer-funded abortion. And those things are in jeopardy. They are in jeopardy because we have two Supreme Court justices, Mansfield and Waterman, who stated in their minority opinion, and I quote, "I wonder if the majority is laying groundwork, instead perhaps a stepping stone, toward a ruling that Iowa's Medicaid program must fund abortions." They went on to say, "The majority requirement of strict scrutiny and narrow tailoring, combined with this rejection of Casey's undue burden standard, would make any abortion restriction very difficult to sustain," unquote. So I'm not going to stand up here and say as a pro-life individual, I supported the heartbeat bill. I am pro-life. I have lots of quotes here from embryologists who say that life begins at conception. That's scientists. But I have no expectation that this amendment would accomplish that. Representative Brown Powers, no one said that rape and incest and all of the other things you mentioned don't matter. We said that they were not impacted by this amendment because we don't believe that they are. And you want to talk about convenient constitutional rights. Considering you give no consideration to the second life involved in abortion, the right to life for that unborn child. That body is never mentioned by those who argue in favor of abortion. And Representative Brown Powers, we can do more than one thing at a time in the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. There's 100 of us. There's lots of committees. We can do this and a lot of other things at the same time. Representative Steckman, we have advanced numerous initiatives to foster adoption. We doubled the adoption tax credit a couple years ago, and we just had a subcommittee today to double the adoption tax credit again. And there have been other initiatives like that as well. Representative Russell Kershell, on protecting mothers and birth control, again, not that those things aren't important, but we don't believe those are needed because we don't believe the amendment touches those things. And again, you never talk about the other body in abortion. Now, Representative Russell Kershell, let's talk a little bit about being misled. And let's talk a little bit about truth over lies. I like that. So let's talk a little bit about truth over lies. Who's fooling whom when 7 states, and maybe it's 9 now, but at least 7 states, Alaska, Colorado, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, and Vermont now allow abortion at any time for any reason, even up to the day of a baby's birth. Who's fooling whom? People on the floor tonight kept saying that's not a thing, that's not real, that's not going to happen. 7 states currently allow abortion up until a baby's birth. And let's face it, folks, the only difference between a child unborn and a child born at 9 months is location. Who's fooling whom? When taxpayers in 14 states, Alaska, Arizona, California, Connecticut, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, and West Virginia have been required to fund elective abortions, and the Hyde Amendment on the federal level did nothing to stop it. And who's fooling whom? When the Democrat Party's national platform calls for taxpayer funding of abortion. So yeah, let's talk about truth over lies. Representative Masher, again, as I said earlier, we can do more than one thing at a time in the Iowa House, and there are 2 bodies involved in abortion. Representative Bohannon, I just want to say to you, I have respected and appreciated some of the perspective that you've given on judiciary and in subcommittees, and I am certainly hopeful we can disagree on issues and still forge friendships across the aisle in this chamber. I know I certainly have friendships with members of this chamber, and I hope to have one with you as well. Obviously, I don't agree with your conclusions on history or conclusions of what this amendment would do. But you mentioned quickening, and you talked about when that took place. And again, I'm hoping that our reasonable restrictions on abortion, such as our 20-week ban, would be allowed to stand if this amendment passes the people's vote. I have no illusions that it will end abortion in Iowa. And again, I just think you talked about irony. I think there's a lot of irony here when we talk about rights, but we never talk about the rights of the unborn child. I don't get that. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about some points that Representative Bohannon and Representative Russell Kershell made about, let's face it, the United States Supreme Court has changed, and perhaps Roe v. Wade could be changed, and in some way the courts could return, let's say, what happens on abortion to the state level. And I don't normally respond to hypotheticals, but in this case, I think this is a good point to respond to. So this amendment doesn't outlaw abortion in Iowa, but let us say that somehow the federal court returned the right to decide on abortion issues to the states. I would just offer this perspective. Who should then determine how abortions are dealt with in Iowa? Should it be unelected Supreme Court justices? Because right now we have a constructionist court, an originalist court. Some would say conservative. Prior, with Justice Cady, we had a court that tended to be more activist in nature. So, on both sides of the aisle, should it be returned to the states? Who are we more comfortable with having to decide issues of abortion? A Supreme Court that could be conservative or liberal, if you want to use those terms, or the people of Iowa through their elected representatives? I pick the people of Iowa. Somebody mentioned that abortion would be unconstitutional in Iowa if this amendment was to pass. I would point out that is not accurate because Tennessee followed almost exactly the path we did, and of course abortion continues to remain legal in Tennessee. Their Supreme Court some years ago created a right to abortion in their Constitution, following a path not unlike Iowa's path to amend the Constitution. The Tennessee legislature passed it through 2 general assemblies. The people voted on it. It was challenged before the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear it. It is now the law in Tennessee, and abortions continue in Tennessee. So I think, if you want to talk about truth over lies, I will say again, I have no illusion or expectation, and I am pro-life, and I make no apology for it. I believe there are two heartbeats involved, two souls when it comes to abortion, and we always forget one of them. But I have no illusions that this amendment is going to do some of the things that were suggested tonight. So I believe that House Joint Resolution 5 is needed because the people of Iowa and not unelected judges of the Iowa Supreme Court should decide how Iowa regulates abortion. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, in a rare interview given not too long ago, made observations that I think are pertinent to this discussion. He said, quote, "I want an enduring constitution, and the idea of originalism is just simply that judges should follow the original meaning of the words on the page and neither add things that aren't there nor take away things that are there. And I worry that both of those things happen when we depart from the original meaning of the Constitution." Justice Gorsuch then pointed to the Dred Scott decision as an example of the danger of judicial activism and adding things to the Constitution that are not there. He said, quote, "The first time the Supreme Court really departed from the original meaning of the Constitution was perhaps Dred Scott, when the court found a right for white persons to own black persons as slaves in the territories of the United States," unquote. He then added, "Scour the document as long as you want, you will not find that right there. They made it up." And boy, did they ever make that up, because it ain't in our Constitution. So the courts don't always get it right, let's face it. So similarly, I believe that the Iowa Supreme Court made it up when they found a fundamental right to abortion in the Iowa Constitution. And contrast the reasoning of the Iowa Supreme Court a few years ago when they created this right with the concept of originalism that Justice Gorsuch discussed. When the Iowa Supreme Court struck down our 72-hour waiting period, the majority opinion stated that we had, quote, "freed ourselves from the private views of the Constitution's founders," unquote. The opinion went on to state that the Constitution should instead be interpreted by the, quote, "current prevailing standards that mark the progress of a maturing society," unquote. Now, the judicial reasoning stated in this ruling, creating a fundamental right to abortion when none had previously existed in the Constitution of Iowa, is the exact opposite of the reasoning stated by Justice Gorsuch and how the courts should read and decide cases. And it goes right to the heart of his fears of what might happen to our Constitution if things are added or taken away from the words that are actually in our Constitution. And I share his concerns. I believe the people of Iowa and not unelected judges of the Iowa Supreme Court should decide how Iowa regulates abortion. And if the prevailing standards of a maturing society truly are the prevailing standards, then surely they would be reflected in the makeup and decisions of the legislature and would not need to be mandated by an activist Supreme Court stepping outside its constitutional bounds. The implications of this ruling, therefore, go far beyond abortion. This ruling challenges the very way our state government functions. It challenges the legislature's constitutional role in government to make laws. And it challenges how the Constitution is supposed to be amended in the state of Iowa. If the Iowa Supreme Court is the final arbiter in determining what should be added to the Constitution, as well as what laws should be struck down that we, the elected representatives, have passed, and they base their rulings not on what is written in the Constitution, but instead upon their unique view of what constitutes the current prevailing standards of our society, then those of us serving in this chamber and over in the Senate, we ought to just take our pens and papers and go home, because, folks, we just became irrelevant. The legislature makes laws, the courts interpret, but not under the philosophy expressed in the ruling that struck down our 72-hour waiting period. This is the first reason that we need the Life Amendment, to respond to the challenge to legislative authority and the people's authority that is expressed by the majority opinion that struck down our 72-hour waiting period and ultimately led to a lower court striking down our heartbeat protections. Again, I believe the people of Iowa and not unelected judges of the Iowa Supreme Court should decide how Iowa regulates abortion. The second reason I believe we must have the Life Amendment is that without it, as I've talked about earlier, I believe we are likely on the way to late-term and taxpayer-funded abortion in Iowa. The ruling striking down our 72-hour waiting period, which led to a lower court striking down our heartbeat protections, created a fundamental right to abortion subject to strict scrutiny in Iowa. Not undue burden, but strict scrutiny. Under this ruling and its application, none of our protections are likely to stand against court challenges. Our 20-week ban on abortion, our laws preventing taxpayer-funded abortions could all succumb to this ruling based upon the strict scrutiny standard that now exists. And again, don't take my word for it. Supreme Court Justices Mansfield and Waterman, in their minority opinion, made this clear. I will quote him again. I wonder if the majority is laying groundwork, instead perhaps a stepping stone toward a ruling that Iowa's Medicaid program must fund abortions. The majority requirement of strict scrutiny and narrow tailoring, combined with this rejection of Casey's undue burden standard, would make any abortion restriction very difficult to sustain, unquote. This is not fear-mongering, as has been said at times, but rather the measured opinions of two Iowa Supreme Court justices in the minority opinion of Planned Parenthood versus Reynolds. During the debate, folks have stated that late-term abortion just is not a thing. It just isn't a thing. Well, as I stated earlier, 7 states, and I think the number might now be 9, allow abortion up until birth. So let us be realistic. The only difference, as we've talked about before, between a baby born and a baby unborn is location. The strict scrutiny standard could very well result in Iowa's ban on abortion after 20 weeks being struck down. And taxpayer-funded abortion is also a real thing, as I discussed earlier. 14 states currently require taxpayer funding for elective abortions. The proposed amendment before us would not stop one abortion in Iowa, contrary to some of the things that have been said tonight. It would put the Iowa Constitution right back where it was prior to the ruling that created a fundamental right to abortion in the Constitution. The right to abortion will rest where it always has in Iowa, with federal rulings and federal law. So we need this amendment because the people of Iowa and not unelected judges of the Iowa Supreme Court should decide how Iowa regulates abortion. We need this amendment because without it, we could see taxpayer-funded and late-term abortion in Iowa. Many Iowans instinctively know that what is growing in the mother's womb is a baby. But now a handful of unelected judges have created a precedent in Iowa that could lead to making it legal to kill a baby up until birth and making Iowans pay for it. Many who are pro-choice do not support this extreme position on abortion. So once again, the amendment reads, to defend and protect unborn children, we the people of the state of Iowa declare this Constitution, that this Constitution does not recognize, grant, or secure a right to abortion or require the public funding of abortion. Mr. Speaker, I move House Joint Resolution 5.
The gentleman from Crawford moves the HJR 5 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Seeing none, the clerk will read.
House Joint Resolution 5, a joint resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the State of Iowa that the Constitution of the State of Iowa does not recognize, grant, or secure the right to an abortion or require the public funding of an abortion be it resolved by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
The question now is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor of its passage shall vote aye. All those opposed will vote no. Clerk will open the machine and the House will pay attention. Record your vote. More of Scott votes aye. Landon votes aye. Jones votes aye. Gaines votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk close machine. The House pay attention to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 55. Those voting no, 44. Absent or not voting, 1. The bill having received a constitutional majority is declared to have passed the House. Are there objections to the title? The chair hears none, and the title is agreed to. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Harrison, Representative Winshittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.